Coming up in this episode of the podcast, we look at which team you should support. We also make some bold predictions for the season ahead, and we cover all of the latest news and developments ahead of the coming season. So kick back and enjoy the latest episode of the Superpesis Roundup podcast. Hello and welcome to the May 2020 episode of the Superpesis Roundup podcast. I'm your host Ian Albert, and joining me is my co-host Mikko Pirhonen. Mikko, how are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good.
Excellent. Unfortunately, our other co-host Ron couldn't be with us at the moment. Pressures of work and such being what they are. Mikko, these times are so crazy. It seems as though almost every moment something different is happening. There's some news about something. We'll go on to the news section in a bit. But there was one thing that I wanted to mention at this stage. You've been doing some Zoom conference sessions with the Asian Pasapalo Federation. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it started as an idea from the Indian Pasapalo Federation and Asian Pasapalo Federation people, as they are in a state of total lockdown for the entire Indian subcontinent, basically. So all of a sudden, I mean, from this crisis, also something good emerged in that sense. So when people have had a lot more time on their hands, we managed to start this kind of a session that, like a daily audience of eager Pasapalo fans, and it's been expanding quite nicely. I mean, especially baseball-related people, for example, from countries such as Ghana, Tanzania, and so on. They have also been interested in this game, and we did it on a daily basis for almost 3 weeks. And now we had also nice guests, for example, a Superpesis plate umpire, Jesse Mäkinen, a former Superpesis pitcher, and a current Kouvolan Palloilijoiden board member, Stefan Spuratura, and these kind of people who use English as their tool in everyday life. So it's been a great experience, to be honest.
Fantastic. And it's interesting you mentioned about a lot of baseball people coming to Pasapalo at the moment. You may have seen the interview that I did with Juha Leskinen from Sillanjärven Pesis.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about content and things like that, because obviously he's the new content creator for SIPA. And one of the things that I noticed was there was a couple of people from America who started tweeting about Pasapalo. And then because I was saying, oh, yeah, you should check out the blog, you should check out the podcast, I had a huge amount of American followers join, and a load of views from on the podcast. In fact, looking just today, there seemed to be a lot of people, or a lot of downloads from Texas, which is great. You know, never thought that we'd get reached to Texas. It's quite interesting.
It is, and as I mentioned earlier, for example, on Twitter, that I see this as a perfect time to bring Pasapalo forward as people's lockdown sport, or like Korean baseball, for example, is at the moment. That they're hitting ridiculous levels of spectators through different kinds of media outlets all over the world. So this is like we have never had a situation before where, for example, Superpesis will probably be played, but Major League Baseball is not played at the same time. So it's not, they are not excluding each other out, but it's an interesting thing to play with the idea. And also just I'm shortly mentioning that when we have been talking about these possibilities of creating like international opportunities for people to follow the game, I have had two very interesting contacts in the last couple of days from pesäpallo clubs who have been asking that if I could come and do like commentary for one game in English. And I also know that the Superpesis is also in talks of doing that on some level within their existing TV deal. So it is definitely something that is like under consideration, but obviously financial things and those have to be taken into consideration. But I think it could become something.
I agree. I mean, it's the way things are. Very sadly, English is such a widely spoken language that it is kind of the gateway to many different things. So being able to get the sport out there, it's going to have to adapt and use English to kind of spread the word. You and I have talked a number of times about how great it would be to have a game commentated on in English, and what you're saying really is exciting to me. I can't wait to see if that comes off.
Yeah.
But in terms of the general kind of situation at the moment, we're going to talk about the news in a bit more detail, but there is some good news. Things are moving forward in terms of the season, but the details aren't all there yet.
Yeah, I mean, the existing, like the status right now is that the women's Superpesis season would be starting in June, and the men's Superpesis season would be starting basically at the start of July. So the women's league would be played roughly 2 or 3 weeks before the men's season would start. And that is basically because of the restrictions concerning the audience that you can, the amount of spectators that you can take inside one event, and that has been limited to 500 people for now up until the end of July at least. So in the women's game it creates problems, but maybe not as much as in the men's game. So that's why the women's league might be better equipped to start a couple of weeks before.
Looking at the likelihood of, for example, Major League Baseball coming back anytime soon, that really doesn't seem to be on the horizon from what I've seen, what I've heard. Any thought of playing what they've suggested being a bubble league where the teams are held up in like a hotel and they're tested every day and all this and the other. Logistically, it's almost impossible for them to work that. So for people in the States or those who follow Major League Baseball, there's a real gap in the market. And one of the things I was talking with Juha Leskinen about, and you may have seen some of the posts on the blog, is how people come to different teams, how they can support them. Because obviously I don't have any kind of knowledge personally of the different places in Finland and the teams other than what I read and what I see. And I think a lot of people, that would be very similar if they're just picking this up as something new. So what I was trying to look at in those posts is almost like a little snapshot of my opinion of what these teams are like. From your experience, obviously you're from Joensuu, you played for Joensuu. They're the current champions. What kind of characteristics would you say describe the team?
Well, nowadays it's like it's like you mentioned extremely well in the blog where you went through all the teams, is that the success of Joensuu is basically, it's been building up gradually throughout the years, and it is actually like in any other sport, success is just the end product of doing things well in every department, and that has actually created a sustainable background for the club to be able to compete. So they are actually in the whole sports, how should I put it? If we take a look at all Finnish sports clubs and we compare that to the overall level of doing things in terms of the actual team and their preparation and their facilities, and also the kind of things that this club does outside the ground. Out of those, some will create some financial benefit, for example, but some are there just to give something back to the community. So that's what I especially like as a local person, that they give back to the community. And it's that's just one example, but I would like to say that about this who to support, it is an extremely important angle. I mean, it's not just for the international audience. It can be also to the Finnish audience, because to be honest, this game is still it hasn't reached its limits within the borders of Finland, even though it's almost 100 years old. So it can still grow, and it still needs to grow as a sport. And just like in any other sport, that if you are from somewhere, you are bound more likely to be connected with the club that you grow up, where you actually grow up. But it can be basically the thing that takes you to support some team. It can be anything, and then it starts from there. And that's the beauty of being a supporter of something. So I think that this is the perfect year to do that kind of thing, and you went through a lot of work to do that, and I really enjoyed reading those as a Pesäpallo person.
You mentioned about something sometimes just clicks, or sometimes it's quite a personal thing to connect with different teams. You yourself, I know outside of Pesäpallo, you're a big Liverpool Football Club fan, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that is true.
How did you come to support Liverpool?
Yeah, that's I was just about to use that as an example, because long story short, when I was a kid, I played football also, and in the Finnish TV on Saturdays we had the 3 p.m. game in England, so it was like 5 p.m. in Finland, and that was basically one of the only live sports events that we had throughout the winter, at least on a weekly basis. And when I was a kid, the Liverpool golden era was about to, they were at the peak at the late 80s. So, and they had some players who caught my attention. And back then, if somebody would have asked me for the next 5 years, that where is Liverpool located on the map, I couldn't even point out that it is actually somewhere in the northwest. I thought that, okay, it's somewhere in England. But then obviously this thing grows deeper and you start to get affiliations and stuff like that. But it has to start from something. And for me, it was one skillful player, John Barnes, that caught my attention. And then the team played well. And if I was born 10 years later, it could have been some other club. But you need to have some kind of connection, something that takes you there. And for that reason, I was enjoying those texts enormously.
Yeah, I entirely agree. One of the main reasons I came to support the St. Louis Cardinals in Major League Baseball was because I was watching them play this was about 2001, 2000 now, in the middle of the night on TV in the UK. And I just really liked the style of play, just got really into some of the players and the characters. And there was one player who stood out there, that was Albert Pujols, who's a phenomenal baseball player.
Yeah, he is.
And he really lit up the clubhouse. So I really started to get into that, and I started to learn more about the club, and I started to learn more about St. Louis itself, and the history of the team. And I'm a big history fan, so we went right back to when they were the St. Louis Browns and St. Louis Perfectos and all these strange things. But it was really, really interesting to do, and I have such a lifelong connection now. Very much like you were saying, it's almost I've nurtured it, and it's grown and grown over the years. But sometimes it's just that little spark, that little thing to say, okay, I want to support somebody. Who are these teams? Tell me a little bit about them, and then I'll start to learn a lot more. I don't pretend that my articles that I've written are the gospel on it, that they are absolutely what people should follow, or everything you need to know about all of the teams. But it's a little taster, I thought. So
it is. It definitely is, and that's. I mean, for me, I see it as like being a fan of something, or being a supporter, and picking your team is something that, okay, it comes quite naturally for most people, that if you start to watch a game, at the end of the game, you are thinking that you like one team more than the other, for example, even though you have no connection to those teams. But also it's one thing that, like, for rational people and people who have to use a lot of rational thinking, for example, in their daily jobs, or if it comes naturally for them, being a fan of something is just very much needed and also appreciated, opposite to that. So you can kind of let go of your rationality and just follow that, and be just let your emotions even be attached to that thing. So it's one thing that, for example, even though I admire enormously the enthusiasm and passion that the manager of Liverpool, Jurgen Klopp, shows in every game. For me, for example, the job as a coach or manager is something that I go about it in a more a rational fashion. So it's as much as I like to see that, but for me it's a working situation, more or less.
One of the things that we touched on in an earlier podcast and just a moment ago was where the teams in Superpesis are based. Most of them are in the countryside. It's very much a sport of the countryside. But we do see some larger towns or even cities with teams in Superpesis now. And one of the key ones I wanted to talk about was Tampere now have a team in Superpesis, which of course you helped coach last year up to that spot in Superpesis. So from your time working with Tampere, what kind of team are Mansa-PP?
Well, they are very much as an organization. It's also been it's been done for, I would say, a good 15 years, or at least a good 10 years. The whole background work and building gradually and finding its natural spot within the sports community of one of the largest cities on Finnish scale, because that's the hard part of it. I mean, up until the third highest level of pesäpallo, it's pretty easy to get a good team in any city or town that has a good university or has job opportunities. But Tampere is, as an organization, they have solved a lot of problems that come after that level. I mean, they are able to get good players to the team and keep hold of those players. It is very much a combination of styles from different sides of the country. So it's a bit of a melting oven of Pesapallo styles and ways of doing things, and it's a fascinating mix. It's got a lot of influence from Pohjanmaa, the western region that is basically where you have most teams in the smallest geographical area, but they have a lot of their main figures now from that region. So let's see what it's like. But the team and the city, they are pretty much the like I said, the melting ovens of Pesapallo.
Well, I'm really interested to see how that plays out. But then you've got teams at the other end of the scale. I know we mentioned, because Ron's obviously a big Vimpeli fan, tiny little villages, 4,000 people or so. So it's a real kind of difference in the two things. So one of the things I tried to touch on in the posts was try and get a bit of a flavour of some of those towns. There is a difference because every year there's an equivalent of an all-star game, the East versus West. I just wanted to, because for example, in Major League Baseball, it's American League versus National League, and those were two competing organisations until they were joined to form Major League Baseball. So there's kind of a historical context behind why there's a difference. But I don't really know much about the East-West kind of divide, other than it's kind of a line on the map.
Yeah. I mean, it's different in Pesapallo in a sense that, like, obviously getting selected to the East-West game, the Italians game, it's one of the highest personal accolades that you can get, because it's like it's as close to playing on a national team that you can actually get outside of actually playing in the national teams. But up until now, the national team of Finland is a place where you can just go and say that I want to play there if they are playing international tournaments or so. But the East-West game has a strong history, and the major difference to all-star games in different sports is that the East-West game in Finland is like they really play 100%. So it's a highly contested game, and it's a matter of history, and it's a matter of kind of a pride to be able to hold that which side has won more. But that's the historical dividing of the teams has been done mostly as like the teams from the west, the teams from the east, and the south and the north. Yeah, they have their own things, but it's more like the styles of play are more like the generalization of the styles of play. That from the western side of Finland, they have a lot of hard heavy hitters, and they count on like hitting a huge number of runs, whereas in the eastern parts, for example Kite, which is the club that I supported as a kid, because it was the closest Superpesis team from Joensuu. So it's like 70 kilometers from my town. So we drove there to watch every game. But their thinking starts from the defense, so from the outfielding. So that has been a big difference when I have come across to people from different sides of the countries. But obviously there are huge exceptions to this kind of thing. It's not so black and white, but that was the way that people were thinking when I was growing up.
Well, I think one player who probably embodies that is the man who's had the most Italansi games is Toni Kohonen, who, of course, started his career in Quito, in Superpesis. And then obviously he's won 10 championships. He's got, I think, 17 or 18 medals in his cabinet, effectively. Yeah. He was fantastic Lucari, and actually is one of the iconic players that I remember when I started coming to the game, that I thought, yeah, this is really interesting. And I started to look at it from more the defensive position than an offensive position. And it was really interesting looking at all of that. So, yeah, I think what you mentioned about the differences between the East and the West is a really interesting difference. Obviously, players swap clubs. You know, they sometimes transfer over to different clubs, and they may be picked for East one year and West the next. Is that the way it works?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's lots of different cases for the player transfers and the reasons for the transfers, and basically the players become free agents every year or every other year, or maybe the longest contracts maybe 3 or 4 years, but normally they're talking about short-term contracts. So yes, it's true that players switch clubs for many reasons, and the cultures have blended a lot more, so it's become different. But yeah, I mean, Toni Kohonen is a very good embodiment of what I was talking about. And obviously, growing up, and he's a few years older than me, following his career in the early stages, I was like a huge fan of that. Wow, can you actually play like that as a pitcher? That he was so physical and so full of fire that, yeah, I've been a fan all my life.
Well, I think we're going to take a short break now, and then when we come back, we'll look towards the up-and-coming season and some predictions. Okay, welcome back. So we're going to talk now about the up-and-coming season. 2020, sort of just around the corner, going to be starting in July now. It looks set to be quite an unpredictable season in many respects. There's a lot of unknowns still about how the season will play out, how many games will be played in any given week. But apart from that, one of the things that I'm trying to look at the moment is, who do we think, right at the outset now, is going to win the championship? It's always nice to kind of put a pin in the map and say, right, they're going to win. I ran a poll on Twitter, and at the moment it's still open, but Joensuu have a massive lead. That they've got almost half of the votes that have been cast so far. Who do you think is going to win in 2020?
Well, I always like to think through the numbers and through the probabilities, and that may come from my background of in mathematics, and also I like to think about things that way. And for example, our national sports betting company Veikkaus gave the odds for the champion of men's Superpesis this year, and if we turn those into percentages, they gave just about over a 50% chance for Joensuu to win the title. And after that, all the other teams were located, the nearest rivals were located at somewhere between 20 and 15%. So it's not like it's a huge difference. It's actually one of the biggest ones that I've seen in recent years, because for years and years there's been always two or at least two major clubs at the same time at the peak of their powers. But now the consensus seems to be that Joensuu is just a step ahead, almost in every sense, but also in terms of the level of the team. So yeah, I would also say Joensuu.
Well, it's interesting you say how far ahead the team seems. When I was watching the Harley SM group stage games, they really dominated. Really dominated. And the thing that was really curious for me was how well they dominated defensively. Because in 2 games, they only gave up 1 run. And when I was watching it back, it was just really tight defensive work. And it's those kind of things, like you say, that win championships rather than just games. So I wouldn't be surprised if Joensuu are in the mix. I've gone for a bit of a risk.
Okay.
There's something telling me that Kouvola, it could be their year. They've got some real big names, some real veterans coming to the team. Obviously not at their peak. Jari Dahlström, of course, and Toni Korhonen. We'll talk a little bit about him in the news section later if he's going to play much. But it's these kind of things that suggest to me that the team is really making that big push. That they're trying to make a statement.
Yeah, and they have been so close for a number of years, and it's like when we come to these kind of circumstances where the only certain thing is uncertainty for this season. I mean, it's like we get the schedule on Friday, how they're thinking about playing the season. So it's 2 days after recording this. But it's like in these kinds of situations, one thing that comes up for sure is that if you have experience in your ranks, and the names that you mentioned that they have added to the team, and if you take a look at the players that Kouvola have, they are grown men. They are in their 30s and stuff like this. So they have played this game. They know it inside out, and they're not gonna be affected if something changes all of a sudden. So that's why this season could be, and it should be, creating more opportunities to completely turn the tables throughout the league, and that would be fascinating to watch. I mean, I would love to see that kind of season, because predictability for a long time was one of the things that actually pushed some people away from the sport, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. Looking back through the medal tables, and you see Sotkamo, dominating year in year out. It reminds me of when I was growing up. A lot of people turned away from Manchester United. I grew up in the Northwest, as you know, and a lot of people kind of ridiculed people if they were United fans. My father-in-law's a lifelong United fan. He grew up in Manchester. He's proper kind of born and bred kind of Man United man. But he was almost embarrassed to tell people that he supported them because they were so successful.
Yeah, it's always the thing that if somebody wins too much, people start to want to push them away from their throne and like start to hate them and stuff like that. I've never been that kind of a person. The dynasties, they are well earned, and it's like I respect that enormously. But yeah, I mean, everybody loves an underdog, and we would love to see good news stories, and we will get those this season, I'm sure.
Well, I asked Ron before the podcast what he thought, and he was fairly non-committal about some of his other answers, but he was straight out of the blocks saying, despite who he wants to win, Joensuu have got this one. And I think using my head, he's probably right, but there's something telling me, I don't know, KPL are making these big statements. It's an unpredictable year. Maybe they could do it.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did, but like, I need to say that I mostly agree with the predictions that have been made lately in the media, like for the people who calculate the odds and predict the things that will happen. So they have a good shot at it, and but I think that Joensuu made exactly the right moves. Now, okay, they lost one of the hearts of the team, Tuomas Jussila, but they made a shrewd signing by getting, in my opinion, the best head coach that you can get, Mikko Korhonen. So it's like getting him was like he brings something new, but he knows he's a winner in this sport, and he's an excellent head coach in multiple sports. So it's like it's not even in his 40s yet. So he brings that new energy, he brings that new thing, and he like that signing was, for me, was the signing of the season so far.
Indeed, I agree entirely. It's going to be really interesting to see how that pans out. Looking then slightly further down the table, one of the other things I talked about before the podcast started was, who do we think is going to be in the top 8? Who do we think is going to make those spots for the playoffs? So who are your top 8 for 2020, Mikko?
Well, I think that the top 7 teams actually can be a little bit separated from the rest of the pack. I mean, apart from Joensuu, there are the usual suspects of like Sotkamo, Vimpeli, Kouvola, Raahe, Hyvinkää. But then it's like it's an open race for the 8th spot, as it has been for many years, to be honest. And I forgot Seinäjoki, who is the 7th team in my top 7. But in my papers, having Tuomas Jussila in his prime years is enough to get any team into playoffs. That's my opinion. So that's why I pick Imatra for Tuomas Jussila and Sami Partanen. They are the reasons why I think Imatra will grab that last playoff spot.
Well, last year, of course, IPV just missed out to Kite, and it was in the last. I can't remember if it was the last game or the last couple of games at the end of the season. It was a really tight race. It was really exciting to watch right down to the wire, and they just missed it. Tuomas Jussila signing is fantastic for them, and I couldn't agree more. I'm really excited to see how that pans out as well. I've gone for the same top 7 that you have, perhaps in a different order. I've suggested that Raahe could actually finish 4th. There's something, again, I've been a bit bold in my predictions here. There's something about them, I think, that they've got a lot of energy behind them. Sami Hapakoski's come back from playing at Vimpeli. They played with a lot of fire in the Haliasam games, and they overturned Sotkamo, which was no mean feat. Yes, of course, it's only training games, but there's something about them. I think maybe they could do it. Maybe could just take that extra step up to 4th.
Well, I will actually even go further. And in my papers, for their experience, I mean, if you take a look at the key players of the teams, they have been there and they have won things. But interestingly enough, it has been a couple of years since they have actually been winning something or finishing in the top 3. So they are experienced players in like the age 35 or so, and they still got more than enough in the tank to be able to compete. And when the chips are down, when we are playing high pressure games, you cannot rule that team out against anybody. So I will go as far as saying that if they can prevent playing against Joensuu in the semi-finals, they have a chance of making it to the finals.
That's an interesting prediction, and I wouldn't dissuade you from that. I think that's an interesting shout. My 8th place team, again, I think I've gone for a bit of a gamble on all of these, but I really like the energy from Mansa Pepe. They've got Matti Ivarinen as game manager for this year. They've made signings like Juha Niemi to really bolster up run production. They're quite a young team. They seem hungry for it. They played really well in the HLSM group games. And when I was watching the Hyvinkää game, they looked really competitive. Now, if they can keep that up, and if it's an unpredictable season, just a couple of results here and there could put them above some of the other teams. But I've gone for IPV in 9th, and I've suggested it might go down to the wire, so I might change that.
And I would be surprised if there's not a huge dogfight again for that 8th spot. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Monse for the potential that they have, especially in their key players, that they are able to win games or get points out of games against a lot of the big teams. And it's a wild card. Monse really is a wild card this season. I mean, it could go either way if we're honest. There are areas in that game that need to be developed a lot, and Ivarinen knows that very well. And it's just a matter of, obviously, if things click, I wouldn't bet against your choice. And for personal reasons, obviously, I would love to see them in the playoffs, but let's see what the season brings.
Again, I asked Ron. This was one of his more non-committal answers. He said he wouldn't really like to say who would be in the top 8. And then my final question was, of course, who do we think is going to finish last? Now, there's not going to be any relegation this year, so my thought is that some of the teams might actually try and preserve themselves a little bit. They might want to give some of the younger players perhaps a bit more of a chance in some of the games, get them some experience, or they might try and shield certain players from potential infection or injury, things like that. So I think we could see a couple of teams not taking as many risks perhaps as they would in a normal season, because there's no penalty for finishing at the bottom or in the bottom 2 or 3.
Exactly. I mean, what we will see is that, for example, if you are already out of the playoff race or your chances are extremely slim, what would be the reason to risk somebody who is playing with an injury at that point, for example? That these teams, for example, last season, Siilijärvi, they had to basically bring guys to play from the operating table. I mean, it was they couldn't practice or they couldn't do stuff, but then they were just brought out to play. So it's exactly like you said, that in these situations, if any clubs runs into that kind of a situation and they have young players that they can give experience safely, we could see some of the same elements that we have in our most followed sport so far, at least ice hockey, that has a North American style closed league, that when a team misses its playoff hopes, they're starting to give. They might even give players away, but I hope that we don't see that in Pesäpallo. But it's an understandable decision that there are no relegations. I think that's a good call.
I agree. One of the things that immediately struck me was how swiftly this rule was put out there. As soon as there was a suggestion that the season was going to start up, it's, as a first rule, nobody's going down. And that takes the pressure off the teams or the clubs feeling that they have to participate in order to retain their Superpesis status. And I think that was a really good thing. I'm not sure that every league around the world in every sport would have opened with that. It is going to be a shame, because one of the highlights in my mind towards the end of the season and in the postseason was Sipe's really dramatic rescue and salvation to retain their Superpesis spot. It was fantastic to watch.
It is. I mean, that has a lot of fascination of its own kind towards the relegation scrabble and the fight. I mean, and the promotion push from Ykköspesis and so on. So it's, but I think that it was absolutely necessary to remove that possibility, because the reality now within the ranks of the teams is that a lot of the players have been fall out from their work, so they they have to keep their, for example, their holidays that they normally would spend at some time of the season for financial reasons. Different companies will have made their employees to take their vacations before the start of the season. And now that they are playing a packed schedule, and who knows what will happen in terms of the infections and stuff like that, it's a really hard combination for semi-professional athletes to go through. And even though the situation regarding the COVID is actually quite reasonable right now, in some regions of the country, we've been speaking about Joensuu and the Joensuu region, like Kite is included in the county. As we speak, there have been over 4 weeks since the last new COVID infection. So, and in total, we're talking about 20 infections in the whole county in the whole time. So it's pretty much non-existent. So, and they are starting to open up the society. So let's hope for the best.
Absolutely. So with all of that in mind, who do you think is going to finish in the bottom spot this year?
Well, my two prime candidates for that were Koskenkorva and Siilijärvi. And as much as I like the work that Siilijärvi has put in with their young team, and they have players that I like a lot in the squad, but they lost so crucial players when Simo Vannikainen went to Joensuu and Kimmo Lukkari stopped playing. So they got players on their place, yes, obviously. But I think that those losses make that it's going to be hard for them, or somebody has to raise their level a lot to be able to avoid that last 2 or 3 spots. And Koskenkorva is my other candidate. They have good, their best players are absolutely from the top drawer. But in terms of the problems that they have in their game, I really wasn't convinced with their play last season or in the Halle SM. So I think that there's a real possibility that things can go south for them. But those are my two candidates.
Well, Koskenkorva last year spent a lot of the season scrapping with Allijärvi for bottom spot in the table. It was only towards the very end, after the Italansi game, that they started to creep up and up the table and really just work their way out of relegation altogether. I've got them sort of similarly down towards the bottom for a similar reason to what you've said, but as with Siipe. But my bottom team pick is Kempele. I like them. I think they're a good organisation, and I think they're really forward-thinking. But I just don't see the level of play that is going to keep them above that bottom space. And today they've actually announced they've had to part company with their game manager.
Yeah.
And a player from Denmark who had signed from Superpesis in Superpesis from last year. He's had to part as well from the team. So there's a little bit of kind of unsteadiness there as well, to add on to what was already my worries and thoughts about them before that.
Well, yeah, I think you have a lot of good points there. I mean, they've been building their program and the whole like structure of the club carefully and doing a good job, but for a number of reasons there are still many uncertainties surrounding the team, out of which the announcement of parting company with their head coach and the game manager is like, it's obviously it's a big concern at this stage, but let's see, they will appoint a new one and come up with that next week, so I think that tells a little bit more about Kemper.
And when I asked Ron this question, he said, I wouldn't like to say. So there we are. That's Ron's prediction. He's not going to tell us. We'll take a second break now, and then we'll crack on with the news and round up exactly what's been going on in this last month in Superpesis. Okay, and welcome back. We're going to look at the news now. Last time it was all doom and gloom. There was a lot of panic, a lot of fear that a lot of the finances in the clubs weren't in great shape. I mean, that's still there. But I think the light at the end of the tunnel now is the fact that because the country is starting to open up, the government guidance is starting to relax a little bit, that Paspalo is going to be played. We're going to see the start of the Superpesis and the women's Superpesis season in June, and that will build then, of course, as we mentioned earlier, to the men's Superpesis on the 2nd of July. We still don't know all the details about how they're going to try and ensure safety for both players and spectators, the backroom staff, the vendors who sell either food or other things at games. But there is some hope. At least we're going to have a season of some sorts. What's your take on that, Mikko?
Yeah, I would definitely agree that right now the situation, the energy within the teams is that they're sensing the start of the season, and for athletes it's like then we return to normal, and for coaches and for like people inside the club, that this is what they know, this is what they are prepared for. And now all the teams have gone through the talks with their not just their people that they are employing, but also the players and the coaches, and have come up with the harsh facts that, okay, we're gonna lose so much money that we have to cut down on your salaries. And if that's not okay with you, you can you need to find a new place where you can play. And for some people, for their personal reasons, it's impossible to play in these kinds of situations, which is completely understandable, of course. But I think that, yes, I mean, now we're talking about a couple of weeks. In the men's league, we're talking about 5 weeks, and we're getting the schedule, and there's definitely hope. So it's not all doom and gloom anymore. So it's more like now everybody is just doing problem solving, but at least people seem to have their hands full now of like the daily stuff, so they don't just like sit around at home waiting that something would happen.
Well, you mentioned some of the problems that players are having. One of the announcements that came out this week was that Hyvin and Tarko have actually had to part company with their game manager and Marcus Duica as well. Their CEO has stepped in to be game manager, so the ship isn't left without somebody at the helm steering it. It's a good and natural choice. It is a shame that Pasi Kokkonen has had to step aside from that role. The details weren't 100% clear, but what I did see from Hyvin Tarko's website was that something you touched on earlier, actually, that people have had to take their holiday days out of sync for where they would normally. And in fact, his work life isn't going to fit in with the Superpesis season. And of course, now it's going to be a shrunk season. There may be more games fit in. It's not something that he can do. And that is such a shame. We've got to try and move on. But it's, there's still a gap between now and the beginning of the season for Darko to really kind of get used to that change.
Yeah, I mean, the life of the life of a Superpesis player and the life of a head coach in Superpesis, it's like most of the time it's like juggling 3 or 4 balls in the air at the same time, because you're trying to fit in your work, you're trying to fit in your family life, you're trying to fit in the pesäpallo, and then there's also other things in life that you have to take into consideration. And this was a prime example that like being a small scale entrepreneur, like running your own company and being responsible for bringing the food to the table, and if you have had to make a lot of cuts in like financially, and if you have had to move your daily life schedule and your plans have been considerably changed, the circumstances are extremely different than like 6 months ago or 7 months ago when he signed the initial contract. And that's a prime example. And I hate to see that kind of things happen. And I really hope that they made the right decisions for their personal life. But also I need to say that new head coach that they have, Mika Rantatorikka, is one of the, if we take a look at from the start of the millennium, he's one of the key factors that Tahko won their championship in 2007. And he has an extremely bright mind, especially when it comes to playing on the outfield. And I would honestly have to say that he's a big improvement actually in that section. And in my papers, even though Markus Tuikka would have been a huge player for them and just what they needed, they can actually benefit from these kind of circumstances in the long run.
And I think that's the key here. There's a lot of decisions that a lot of teams are having to make. One of the other things that I've seen is Vimpeli have agreed with the players to reduce their salaries for 2020 in order to make sure that there's enough money to go around, keep the club afloat, because a lot of their revenue, being from such a small place, a lot of their revenue comes from the tickets, comes from the restaurant and the food that they sell at the games. So all of a sudden, if that's drying up or it's reduced, having the players agree to reduce their wages for the season is it's a big ask, but it hopefully will help Vimpeli in their specific situation stay afloat.
And this is another prime example that a lot of clubs have come forward with similar kind of statements in the last couple of days and last couple of weeks. For example, Kempele and Imatra. And there was also a big article in one of the big daily papers in Finland about the financial situation of the clubs in general. And it's a harsh reality that if they take a look at the contracts that have been negotiated 7 months ago, there, in the end, I don't think there's a single club that can hold on to those commitments, unfortunately. And in these circumstances, I think the players also, they are obviously, they understand the situation, and they know that we're all in this together. But in a short term, I think that this will also bring the game a little bit more to the grassroots, and it makes it a little bit more of an amateur sport, not just a semi-professional sport. But it will also bring, if we take a look in a couple of years, I'm sure that it will bring new clubs to the stage, because there's always somebody who's willing to give it a shot and for whose company is doing quite well despite of the situation, for example. And the reality is that if somebody wants to come up at the end of this season, if everything stays, if anything goes back at least even close to normal, somebody could gather up actually top 5, top 6 team with a really moderate amount of money, if we're being honest, because a lot of wages have to be cut in the long term also. So let's see. I mean, this can bring a whole lot of new players to the stage in terms of what clubs are successful.
Going back to what you said about the contract commitments, one that really has caught my eye was a name we already mentioned, Toni Kohonen, with KPL. There's still some uncertainties over whether he's either going to start the season with them or whether he'll play at all for them. I really hope that he does, not just because I've picked KPL as my championship pick, but also because he's a great personality to have out there. It's a really interesting player. And one of the most intriguing things about his signing is he is not going to be playing as a Lukari. He's going to be somewhere in the infield.
Yeah, and it should make an interesting, like it deserves some recognition and it deserves attention on its own. It's a fascinating change, and the reality is that his talent, despite the years, I mean, the talent that he has on the bottom of it all, his mindset and his game time experience, and most of all, in my mind, the absolute willingness to drive things forward and win at all costs. It's like, it is something that I would be fascinated to see. He's already familiar with the club. He's played there. He has what it takes to play as an infield player for sure, but his overall mentality is something that could help actually to make the final push towards being a championship team, even though he's like 43 or something at this stage. These things never go away. And it's just as a quick comparison, now there's a hugely popular Netflix sports documentary series, The Last Dance, about Michael Jordan. And watching that and knowing something about the personality of Toni Kohonen and having followed him closely, to be honest, a lot of the stages when I was going through the documentary, I was thinking that, damn, that's exactly what this guy has been doing in our sport. And that's how I think about him. So yeah, I really hope he plays.
Well, I think that's going to wrap it up here for the podcast for another week. I want to thank, as ever, my co-host Mikko Pirhonen. I also want to thank Ron for his picks, or what picks he gave for us. And I hope we can have him back soon. But Mikko, it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, and always a privilege, always a pleasure.
So we'll be back sometime in June. We'll be looking at some of the signings in the off season, hopefully when there's a bit more stability. there, and we'll see how the start to the season for Superpesis and the women's Superpesis has gone, and what developments we've seen there. If you want to know more about Superpesis in English, you can follow our blog. That's superpesisroundup.blogspot.com. If you like the podcast, or even if you don't, then please comment. Leave us a comment. It would be absolutely great. If you do like us, then please follow us. We're also on Twitter at SuperpesisR. So again, follow us there. And once again, thank you very much for listening.
If you've got something that's hidden far away,